The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to TechGig webinar series, our endeavor to empower techies. We believe that sharing of knowledge is the key to enhance our skills and grow us as professionals. With this principle in mind, we have initiated a series of webinars conducted by industry experts to give you all a crisp insight of various domains. The topic of today's session is Features of iOS 7. And our guest speaker today is Rajesh CV. He's the lead trainer at Steyr. Rajesh has more than 3 years of experience as an Apple certified trainer at Steyr Learning, delivering training on Mac OS X and iOS development courses. Possesses comprehensive knowledge about the Mac OS and iOS development. Skilled in training individuals and corporates and possess sound technical skills. So without further delay, I introduce you all to our guest speaker. Over to you, Rajesh.
Yes. Good evening, everyone. And TechGig, thanks a lot for this opportunity. So today I'm going to present on features of iOS 7. So before we dive into features of iOS 7, what is iOS? So iOS stands for iPhone operating system. So it is a mobile operating system which was launched by Apple. And iOS 7 is the 7th major release of the mobile operating system designed by Apple. So when was it released? It was announced at company's WWDC conference on June 10, 2013 and was released, finally made public on September 18, 2013. So now question about how much does it cost to be an iOS developer, that is an individual or enterprise. Now for this, Apple has got a couple of developer programs. This is as follows. iOS developer program, that is for an individual, so you need to pay $99 per year. And with this, he can actually create an app, he can actually test the app on the device, and also he can post this app on the App Store. The other one is iOS developer program for a company, that is $99 again per year, and here the team can develop an app, they can test the app on the device, as well as they can distribute it to the App Store. Now the other one, for this you require a DNS number. Okay. The other one is iOS developer program for the enterprise, that's $299 per year, and here the company can create a proprietary app that is called, so-called as in-house app, and for this again they would require a DNS number. But only thing that they can't do here is they cannot put it onto the App Store. And the final one is iOS developer program for the university. Now this is free for the college students where they can create the app, they can test the app on the device, but only thing they can distribute it internally onto the registered devices, or they can share the apps that would run on the registered devices, but they cannot put on the App Store. So these are the iOS developer programs that are available from Apple. Now a question about what devices are supported by iOS 7. Now for this, it supports right from iPhone 4, iPhone 4S, iPhone 5, and the latest iPhone 5s as well as iPhone 5C. And it also do support on the from iPad 2, that is the second generation iPad, or the later one, or even the iPod touches from 4th generation or later. Now the topics that we're going to discuss in this webinar is visual design with respect to iOS 7, enhancement and deprecations, new features, and finally the hidden gems on iOS 7 development. So as we all know, iOS 7 was a major release and they completely revamped the UI. So first when we look at our app icons, so we're going to talk about app icons a lot. First let me discuss under visual design what I'm going to cover. So I'm going to cover app icons, size of the status bar, the navigation bar, the table views, iconography, and finally typography. App icons. So as I told you, there was a massive change in the UI, and Apple completely changed the way the iOS looked. So in iOS 7, you could see the icons are totally different. They are they are more in depth. They're color balanced well. There's a lot of clarity in the icons, and the icons are slightly larger than the previous version of iOS 6. Now, what Apple has done is they have introduced a grid system. Now, the grid system is a visual layout which Apple has designed to place the visual elements or the visual assets that are being part of an icon so that they look perfect, or they look more clear, or they tell what your app is all about. So Apple feels that it gives the designers a visual layout or a visual template to put all their visual assets that's a part of an icon and make a really good icon. So that's all about this grid. And another thing about this grid is all dimensions are based on golden proportion. And the simple old radii values are being removed in this. Next, moving on to status bar. As we could see, the status bar, the height of the status bar or the size of the status bar is same as iOS 6. But the thing that we need to note is the appearance is slightly changed. Now you can control the background color to match the look of your app design, or you could use the default color themes, that's white or black. In a lot of default iOS 7 apps, the status bar is actually visually connected with the navigation bar without any separations. So that's all about the status bar. Now moving on to navigation bar. So navigation bar is usually consists of a title, and you would find an action button. In this case we have an edit. It could be create or it could be new, or even you would have a previous button on the left hand side. Now here we're going to talk about the height of the navigation bar in portrait mode. It's going to be 88 pixels. Whereas to adjust more content, they have shrunk the navigation bar in landscape mode to 64 pixels. So that's a change in the navigation bar in iOS 7. Next is the table view. Now table view is a full width of display and not any longer surrounded by a container that separates the tables from each other. Now only the visual separation between the table views are headlines which appear on the top of the table, as you know, as the previous iOS 6. But each cell has got a cell height of 88 pixels, and the inner padding of a cell is 30 pixels, both left and right. And the line which divides each cell is going to be of 1 pixel thickness. So these are actually the default informations that is with respect to the table view cell. Now let's move on to iconography. Now Apple uses massively the icons, especially in their tab bar controllers, or you could actually see them in the tab bars. Now Apple has used this quite long ago. They've been using outlines which is of 1 pixel length for the icons. Now there are two states here. Either they're activated or not activated. They use inverted colors here, and they're using tint colors. So now in this case I'm showing you alarm which is of red color, that is activated, so it just fills with a solid color, and which is not activated would be just, you know, you would get an outline. So this is with respect to the icon. Now coming to typography. Apple has used Helvetica Neue before at greater widths, including iOS 6, and it was one of Steve Jobs' favorite fonts. It's still the default font in iOS. In one of the previous iOS beta, actually when iOS 7 was launched, they used Helvetica Neue Lite, But then in the later beta, they changed it to Helvetica New regular. So that's about the typography. Now, so whenever a new iOS version is released, usually there will be some enhancements. At the same time, there will be some deprecations. So let's see what are the enhancements that are there and deprecations that are there. So we're going to talk about implementation of NSURL First Object API, introduction to a new type called as instance type, and usage of tint color versus bar tint color. And finally, the texture colors are gone. So we're going to see that there are no texture colors right now. We're going to see that in detail. So firstly, implementation of NSURL First Object. Now, this was one of the most requested API in Objective-C. A simple search on OpenRadar shows several requests that have been filed with Apple. Because Apple was using this private for a long time, since their very first version of iOS, but now it's made public. And it's finally available. Now it's a public API, you could usually use it. So how to use it? You declare an array. In this case, I have some objects initialized in an array, and I call array first objects. That's all. You get the first object. But previously, you had to do the following what I've actually written. You had to do a workaround to get this thing done. But right now, it's simple. It's just first object. You get the first element. So this is one of the implementation. Now, coming to introduction to instance type. Now, what is instance type? Instance type is relatively a new addition to Objective-C. It's actually a new thing. And why this is introduced? It is introduced to improve the type safety. Now, what is type safety here? As we all know, it exists in all the languages. So in Objective-C, the conventions are in just matter of coding best practices. They are just implicit instructions to the compiler. Now, what does that tell? For example, let's take I have alloc and init. Both have return types of ID. But yet in Xcode, the compiler makes all the correct type checks. Now, how is this possible? Okay, it's because in Cocoa there is a convention that methods with names like alloc or init always return the objects that are an instance of receiver class. Whereas a class construct methods, although they have a similar return ID, they don't get the same type checking benefit because they don't follow the naming convention. So let's actually illustrate that using an example. Now I have an example here where I'm allocating an array, I'm initializing an array, and I'm calling media playback allows airplay. We all know that this method has got nothing to do with this NS array. But then immediately the compiler jumps in and tells me that, hey, there is no visible interface for NS array. Whereas when I use NS array media player as a constructor, a class, I just get no error. But the runtime, I would get an error, but I would not get an error while compiling it. Because alloc and init follow the same naming convention for being related to result type. Now, correct type check against NS array is performed in that case, and however the equivalent class constructor of array does not follow the convention. That's why it is interpreted as an ID. So it's not doing a type check. And usually you use ID for opting out of type safety. Now, for example, in this case, I have a class called as person, and I have a method which returns an instance type instead of an ID. And the name of the method would be person with name in a string, which takes a parameter as a string, that's name. And this is where the compiler steps in to resolve this timeless edge case to the Objective-C type system. With instance type, the compiler will correctly infer the result of person with name, and what I get as a return is an instance of the person. So that's how we ensure the type safety using instance type. Now, there are some advantages using this. Now, what are this? Actually, your code is doing what it says rather than something else. And the second one is you're building a good habit for times. Right. The third one is consistency. You have established some consistency in your code, which makes it more readable. Okay. So these are three things: explicit, pattern, and consistency. Now, moving to the Next thing, usage of tint color was bar tint color. Now Apple extensively used tint in the iOS 7, either when you look at calendars or you look at Notes application, you find an yellow tint on the buttons, or else if you use the contacts, you find a blue tint. Now they've majorly used the tint in most of the applications. So in iOS 7 you can tint your entire app with a given color, or setting the tint color of your app is easy as new property. So a tint color is nothing but a property, as simple as using a tint color to your view. So here I have an example. So in this example I'm actually setting the property of view tint color as red color, and now if you find this quite familiar, you might have used this. In iOS 6 you had bar, you had a tint color to the navigation bar, but now that's been changed to bar tint color. So tint color was there, but that you could use that only on a navigation bar, but now you have it. So you use bar tint color instead of tint color. Now what about this? The texture colors are gone. So you might have seen this texture colors in iOS 6 a lot. Right from when you register the device for the first time, you find this a lot. But right now, these are the methods that were behind this, and these are the methods that are deprecated. So you no longer use this. View flip side background color is deprecated. Scroll view texture background color is deprecated. Under page background color, even that is deprecated. So these are the couple of methods with respect to the texture colors being deprecated in iOS 7. Okay. Another thing that is being deprecated is UI button type system, and we all know that iOS 7 is intended towards a flat design element where you find lots of borderless buttons. So there's no point in writing UI button type round red. So that's been deprecated, and it's been replaced by a new API that is UI button type system. So from now on we'll be using UI button type system. So with that, we move towards new features. So as usual, when there is a new operating system being launched, you will have a couple of new features. And the iOS developer community truly welcome them, happily welcome them. So we're going to see a couple of new features. So first of all, Apple actually added a new multitasking functionality. One feature is background fetch, which I'm going to talk about in detail. Another one is remote notifications, although they existed, but now there's a small change in it, and it's absolutely cool. The third one is background transfer service, and this is completely new. So before we look into all those features which I told you, we'll just look into how multitasking works on iOS. So there is a new thing called as App Switcher. So the guys who are not iOS users, now this is what happens when you want to switch from one app to another app on an iPhone or any iOS device. You just hit the home button. So when you double tap the home button or double click the home button, it actually gets into this mode called as multitasking mode, where you can skim through all this apps, and app shows a snapshot in this case. Whereas previously this wasn't the case. You didn't have any snapshot or the current update of the app being shown, but right now it is. Now in this case, even though app shows a screenshot, even though the app is not running in the background, they're just showing you a screenshot or snapshot of the state of the app. So as soon as the app gets into the background mode, this is what happens. So you want to switch, you just hit double tap and you get this smooth scrolling view where you can skim through all the recently used apps and switch to them. Now, how good is this in iOS 7? Now let me give you an example. I'm using a message app. Let's say I'm chatting with one of my friend, and so there's a to and fro chatting happening. And let's say like I switched from my message view to my mail view, and I'm reading some mails. But then I get a message. So how do I get it? I come to know using the notification. So in the notification I get saying that, hey, this person has messaged you, or this person has texted you. then what happens in the new multitasking is, even though I get a new notification, I really don't. So let's say I didn't have a look at the message. I'm just reading my mails. But then when I double tap on my home screen, my app's screenshot is updated with the latest message which I received. So that's really cool. Now how does this work under the hood? So we are going to see that right in a moment. So so this is how it works. First of all, you tap on an app, your app is launched. Once your app is launched, it's going to fetch some new content. For example, let's say it's our messaging app. And once that is done, it's going to update my UI. And let's say the user has hit home button. Now the app suspends, but at the same time it takes a snapshot. So it takes a snapshot of the current update and puts it to the app switcher. And there are two more things, the two more entry points in this flow, that is remote notifications and background fetch, which would be slightly talking about it in the next slide. So this is how app switcher works. So first of all, background fetch. So these are the two things, background fetch and remote notifications. So I'm showing you a screenshot of the capability. So if you want to do any kind of backgrounding, operation on iOS, first of all you need to go and enable those capabilities. Enable them under capabilities section. So we just go to capabilities and you enable background fetch and remote notification. So this is where you go and enable them. And it's available for all the apps. Now what does this mean? Now, as you can see my capabilities section, you can see a couple of names: iCloud, Game Center, Passbook, in-app purchases, Maps, Interapp Radio, and all that. Now, previously when you had to do any kind of backgrounding task done, let's say the person hits a home button and you want your app to be running in the background, but then your app should fall under any of these categories. Otherwise, Apple was never allowing any kind of backgrounding activity. So, but now, you don't have to be specific about your app. You don't have to say that my app, even though your app, for example, let's say Maps, location update was an app where they could use this feature exclusively, or VoIP, if your application had VoIP in them, they could use this feature exclusively. But what about the apps which doesn't have any of these features, which is some other kind of application? So, but now you can use them. So it's available for all the apps. It's not completely specific on each and every functionality that your app provides. And it is PowerSmart. Now what is PowerSmart? Actually this is not being initiated by the user. It is being initiated by the iOS. So the daemons do this. So you don't have too much control over this. So iOS is actually deciding when to do this or when to fetch this. We're going to talk about that in detail. So it's not going to drain your app battery a lot of your phone. So that's with PowerSmart. So now let's get into the topic background fetch. Now how this background fetch happens. So it's like it looks for an opportunity to perform this background fetch. Now what does that mean? Let's say I'm actually using an app. It's a newsfeed app, and I just open the app. Let's say morning I just open the app and I go through the news feeds, and then finally I open the app in the evening. So what my iOS does, it actually profiles. It profiles when I'm using my app, so that it updates before I'm going to open my app. So it studies how I'm going to use my app. So this is how it performs. So let's say it's 5 p.m. Always I open my, usually at 5 p.m. I just open my app to check my news, but then before 5 p.m. my app would get updated in the background with the content. That is background. So it can be a game or a social field or anything, and it also updates the app snapshot. So the user feels that he's up to date. So even he's in the app switcher, he said, wow, I got the new or the latest feed even though I didn't open my app. So this is totally done by background fetch, and it is initiated by iOS. Now as I told you, it's based on the previous usage. So iOS is going to look at it like how the person is going to use this app, when these apps are getting opened, and then tries to launch the app in the background. And it also can be at opportunist time. Now what does this mean? Now this can be, let's say, it can also do an update or a call on this app when you're in conditions like you have switched your phone to a power. You have plugged your phone to a power, or you have a very good signal strength and your battery is good. At that time also the apps can, the OS can call your specific app and go for an update. So what as developers we need to do is, as developers we should be always ready. That is why I'm talking about this. As developers we should be always ready that whenever iOS calls me, I should be ready to go and fetch the data and update my UI. So let's come back to the previous flow. So in this case, what happens is, so both of these new modes which I'm going to talk about, one is remote notifications, which we'll be slightly seeing in a moment, and background fetch, have UI application delegates that go along with them in both cases. And there is a completion handler that is handed to you, and you actually need to call the completion handler. And when you're done with updating the UI, the app would suspend as usual, let's say, and take a snapshot. So this is how it works. So you are given a completion handler and make sure you use it. Rest is handled by the iOS. So updating the content. So there are certain things that we need to note while updating the content. One is call the completion handler as soon as possible. So if you're taking too much of time, you're not calling the completion handler, you may get terminated by the iOS. And also keep your fetches small. Now background fetch is not used for fetching large amount of data. Actually you have another new feature, that's what we're going to talk about that in a moment, called background file transfer, a file service or transfer service. So that is for the large amount of data. So always when you're using a background fetch, make sure you do a small fetch and use the background transfers for large data. Now another thing you should be really concerned when you're updating the content is beware of data protection. Now why am I talking about this? Now this may be an interesting case when you need to, fetch, and so let's say you're going to fetch some data and you're contacting some servers, okay, and the servers in some cases would require credentials, and the person let's say the person has locked his phone, and but this background demons would be calling this app, and the whole process what we talked about would be happening. But at that point of time, if it requires the credentials, and we should note that whenever your phone is locked, data protection is enabled on your phone. That means your keychains are locked. So now you cannot access your keychains because they are locked. Now this can lead to confusions. The problem here is many people may not properly read about data protection on iOS, so they think that they're not able to contact the server, or their passwords are wrong, or there's an authentication failure, all such issues. So please give attention to the data protection, okay? And to get around this, I would recommend to read Apple's document on data protection and security frameworks. Now, how do you actually do this background fetch? You turn on the capability as I told you in Xcode, and actually you set a minimum background fetch interval code. That's a piece of code that you need to write, and I'll be showing you where you should write that. And you explicitly enable your that in your app delegate, and you implement a method, perform fetch with completion handler. That's a delegate method. And finally you call the completion handler. Okay, so let's go and have a look at how we're gonna write this in our piece of code. So as we all know, this is our delegate, application delegate, which is in our app.delegate.h file, and we actually write this piece of code so that you're telling the OS, okay fine, there's a new content, please do call me, I'm going to update it. So you need to write this piece of code, set minimum background fetch interval. Now this is the default piece of API to perform this background fetch. There's another API where you say UI application background fetch interval never. That means your background fetch will never happen. But we are just focusing on this. So then when you do that, your delegate that is performed with perform fetch with completion handler would be called, along with a completion handler. And this is where you actually write the piece of code to do any of your tasks. Let's say you want to contact your server, download the new data, and all that. Now, coming to push notifications. Okay, so push notification is delivered to an app. Let's say push notifications was there all the way. Even you have used in iOS 5 or iOS 6, you would get a notification. Now, there's something different here. Now, how this works? So previously, how it used to work? Let's say like I used to get, I'm not in the app right now, I'm out of the app, my app is not running, my app is suspended, or even in a terminated state, let's say. And you get a notification. Let's take the previous example that we have used for our messages. You get a notification, you get it in the notification bar, let's say, and unless you hit that notification item, and then it opens your app, then it tries to download the data. So immediately the data is not downloaded. You need to open the app and then it tries to pull the data from the server. So usually your APS piece of code that you write, your payload looks like this. You'll have an alert, especially that will be an alert view, or in fact you could use a sound. You could use a sound or you could use an alert. So this is how your payload looks. Now, the new thing in remote notification is that you could use content available. Now, if you set this key, what happens is, so in the previous scenario, we just saw that you get the notification, you just tap on it, it just opens your app, downloads the content. But in this case, you get the notification straight away, your app is kicked in the background, kick-started in the background, it starts running, starts downloading the data. So if the user, at a later point of time, if he tries to switch to the app, he already has the updated data. So very simple thing, only one thing that you need to do in your payload, just you need to set content available 1. Now, there's another request from many developers. They wanted silent notifications. But then finally now they can be happy because Apple has allowed that. Now you could send silent notifications. Now silent notifications are like, you don't want the user to get disturbed. Whenever you send a notification from your server front, you want the app to get updated without disturbing the user. So how that can be done? Now, you don't want alert, you don't want sound. Only thing that you need to do is you need to just set your content available key. That's all you have to do. You get a silent push and user is not notified. But one thing that you need to note here is your pushes of the silent notification should not be too frequently, as Apple says. So if you're too frequent in sending this, you may get throttled. Okay, but even though Apple says they have set the limit as high, but then you should be aware of this. Too many frequent notifications will be stored in the server and might be delivered later, but not at that point of time. So with that, we'll move on to background transfer service. So what's background transfer service? Now, this is a service to upload or download data. Now, even this wasn't allowed in the previous previous version, sorry. Let's say you have an app and you're downloading music in the app and you try to switch to another app. And now what happens is you had an opportunity where you could ask some time, that you could ask the iOS like give me some point of time and later you can kill me or you can terminate me. But then if the data is too large, what happens is at any point of time you switch it, after some time anyway your app is gonna get terminated if your app doesn't fall under any of the categories which I earlier mentioned. But now using background transfer service, you can just do this. You can just download, you can switch the app. Your app may be terminated or suspended, but it makes sure the content is downloaded in the background and notified to the user. So it's a transfer done out of process. As I told you, again, the iOS is the one who is actually taking care of this. The daemons are taking care of this. So apps can be suspended or be terminated, but it keeps on downloading it. Now, it is specially used for or intended for large amounts of data. As I told you, if you have a couple of large images, you have large files to be downloaded, you can actually go for this. And it's relaunched in the background when the transfer is complete. Now, So in order to achieve this, you have a new class in iOS 7. Now that's called NSURL Session. So initiate NSURL Session. Now I'm going to show you like how you're going to use this NSURL sessions. So first of all, you need to create a configuration object. Now this is the one who is going to tell the daemon, okay, go and download this stuff for me. So you need to initialize your configuration object, but there are then a couple of other configuration background session configuration objects, but I'm going to just deal with the one which we see right now, that is background session configuration. And then what you do, you actually create a session. So this is how you actually declare them, and you create a session and you initialize that with a configuration object, and you set the delegate. Now for the guys who are new to iOS, delegate is a kind of a pattern that's being followed in iOS. Okay, so this delegate object is gonna get called whenever the download is complete or you want to notify the process and all such things. So it is, in other languages I could say it's like a callback. And also I need to use here the delegate queue. I need to specify an operation queue. Then finally I need to specify the URL, because that's where I'm going to get the content from. That's where you mentioned to where should you go and fetch it. So you initialize your URL and you initialize an object called NSURL Session download a task with the URL, and there you go. Once that is done, so let's say the tasks are created, paused, so let's say the person hits home button, you can always resume it later and start the downloads. Now people use this in conjunction with the previous background fetches, like what we saw, remote notifications. Let's say you want to get notified at the same time you want to download a large amount of data, so usually they go in conjunction with respect to an application. Now the task support here, as we know, these are all the network calls. So what all network calls can do can be done here. You know, it supports suspending, it supports resuming, it supports canceling, and when complete, the app is resumed in the background. So this is the guy who's gonna get called. So handle events for background URL session, and it has got a completion handler. So this is where you actually write the code for re-establishing the session and you handle the results. And so completion handler, you're going to tell that, okay, fine, I'm completed with the download. Okay, fine, I'm completed with the upload. Things like that. Now, the things that you need to consider here with respect to the delegate which I showed you, short amount of time is given to handle the results. So that there is a background timing object or a property, we could see like how much time left, and you can actually do this. And be sure you call the completion handler soon. But if you don't call the completion handler soon, it's going to get terminated. And as I told you earlier, be aware of the data protection. So you may be running while the device is locked. At the same time, you want to download something from a server and it has got credentials, and things are stored in your keychain, it's locked. So you need to just read the Apple documents for data protection. So with that, we'll move on to modules. Now what is modules? With the day first, when you write an Objective-C code, you might have used a pound import, viewController.h. Say in this case, even it's a console application or even it's a single view application, you might have written this. So what does do? It is better than our include statements. Okay, it's better than our include statements. So here what happens is, we usually use our system frameworks to import them. We use mapkit.h, mapkit/mapkit.h, or we may even use media player, mediaplayer.h. But now we have a new thing called as @import media player. Now how this is better than hash import or pound import? Now what happens in hash import is, you are actually copying and pasting that particular piece of code in your code, and it has got to do with your build times, right? It has to be linked and also indexed properly. But in this case, when you actually use @import, what's going to happen here is Apple says that it's going to create a symbol database, optimized symbol database, and it's anyway going to query all this files or methods or classes in a very fast way. rather than the previous. So rather than the previous method of using pound import. So it's actually a benefit for you because the performance is great, because if you're dealing with larger projects, you have so many classes, you're importing so many system frameworks, and the system frameworks in turn calls other system frameworks, in turn calls so many classes and methods. So it's gonna be a huge impact on your build time. So use at import, which is gonna be very fast. Your build times are very fast, as well as it helps. Using at import, your indexing is also faster. So now let's say like. And it's followed by a semicolon. Now, if you want to import a part of the framework, you can always use the dot operator followed by semicolon. Now, another advantage here is when you use pound import, you have to manually go and enable. So there is a section under build phases where you go and link libraries. But in the earlier cases, you had to do this. Otherwise, it will end up in a runtime error, or you will not be able to compile the project unless you include these libraries. But right now, you don't have to do this, because the modules will take care of all this. So it's automatically going to link your libraries and do the work, and it's pretty faster. So the only thing that you need to do here is, if you're not enabled, you need to just go and enable that in your build settings under enable modules, and also you just set your links frameworks automatically. So it's anyway going to link to the framework automatically. So it's an optimized symbol database, which much faster than .h. It will auto-link any necessary framework, and by default it is enabled in all export file projects. So moving to 64-bit support, as we all know, since iPhone 5s was launched, it's a 64-bit device. So Apple has moved to a 64-bit architecture. But certain things that you need to know when you actually do with the type size change. The things like integer, float, and double will remain same as 4 bytes, whereas even on a 32-bit as well as 64-bit, but whereas the data types like as long are 4 bytes in 32-bit and as well as 8 bytes in a 64-bit. And that's actually does for a pointer or NS integer, CG float, and CF index. Now this isn't a problem at all, but the problem comes when you actually try to use an inconsistent data type. That's when, let's take an example. Here I'm going to show an example where I have a method calculate random number, which will return me an NS integer. So in this case, it's going to return me an NS integer, but now this won't be a problem in my 32-bit architecture. But if I'm going to use my 64-bit, we all know that NS integer is going to be 8 byte and integer is going to be 4 byte long, and this is going to have a serious issue. So that is one more thing. And by default, you don't have the settings to separately compile a build for 32-bit as well as 64-bit. There's only one setting in your build setting. Just go ARM64 or ARMv7 or ARM7s. There is no specific build right now, but maybe Apple may come with this in near future. So this is where you actually go and do the setting. And the other issues are like pointer arithmetic, because so this can be a problem with people consider Objective-C as another language. Let's say they want to cast pointer to int and perform some arithmetic operations. I mean, that's never going to work. I mean, it's going to be a problem. And don't directly access is a pointer, because if you want to get into the internal structure, let's say you write row codes to get the internal structure of an object, and you try to use is a pointer, but I would recommend using object get class method instead of using is a pointer, because that again leads to a problem. Another one is, if you have written any assembly language in your code, please rewrite that for the specific platforms, or else again, maybe the static analyzers may not come up with all these problems, but you might get caught somewhere else, because you never know where the problem lies. I would recommend you to read a small 25-page document which is released by Apple 64-bit transition guide, when you're writing apps for 64-bit as well as 32-bit. Okay, so that's with 64-bit transition issues. Now finally, we'll move on to hidden gems of iOS 7 development. Now these are, all the way along they are there, but we are never aware of it. But then here are some tricks which I'm going to teach you guys. Method completion, the first one. Second one is edit in scope. Third one is renaming IB objects. Fourth one is URL utilities. Now what is method completion? So in method completion, let's say usually if you might have seen that The methods are very large in Objective-C and they're very self-explanatory, but it's very difficult to remember these methods by heart. So how will you help your IntelliSense to call this such kind of methods? How would you easily write this method? So I'm going to teach you a trick where you put a hyphen. So a hyphen stands for a instance method, and plus stands for a class method. And you just have to type the beginning name of the function, and that's all. You get the IntelliSense. You don't have to type the return type. Just write the name of the functions and you get it. So that's how you actually autocomplete it. Now moving to edit in scope. Edit in scope is another neat little trick which I'm going to teach you. Let's say I have some code here. What this code does, this doesn't really matter for you guys. But here in this function, on this method, if you see, there's a variable called as CG.Position, and that appears in a couple of places. It even appears in for loop. But now this is quite confusing for me. But I want to rename this position. So what do is I just use this edit in scope feature. So first of all, so I just select CG.Position, and what happens is I just go to editor, edit all in scope. So it's actually visualizing the scope. You get it highlighted everywhere. The only thing that now you need to do is just go and rename them, and that's all. You're done. So that's another neat little trick. So use this. Another one is renaming IB objects. Now this is with respect to your interface builder, okay, where you have this view hierarchy. So you might find a complex UI elements and you don't know what to refer. So it just creates a relationship. So what you can do here is, so let's say I have so many views and image view, but it's not very much easy for me to, if I have so many visual elements, to identify which element is for what. So I can just click on them, like how we, for the macOS users, how you just rename a folder. You just tap on them, give a pause, give a click again. It's just in the renaming mode or editing mode where you can just rename them. So in the same way, I can just rename. Now, point to notice, these are not going to get compiled along with the XIB files. It is just for the presentation purpose. So it's never going to get compiled. So it doesn't matter what you name here. You don't have to change not even a single piece of code. So that's really a cool thing. Now finally we are moving to URL utilities. Another cool thing which I want to show you guys. Usually we have used lots of utilities when you're connecting to your web service. You have a URL here, let's say, and we all know URL consists of certain parts like scheme, host, path, and query, even username and password and fragments. So we use NSURL.h or we use categories to manipulate them. You try to break your URL path components. You try to use many string functions using appending the last component, or you may use appending file extensions, APIs. I mean all string related functions. But now you don't have to do that. You have to just use your NSURL components class. So once you initialize components.class, you have couple of properties like scheme, user, password, host, path, and fragment. Only thing that you need to do is just initialize them. Once you do that, you can actually query them for your URL, or another good thing is you can also modify them. So you can, so this NSURL components is especially used for building an URL from scratch as well as modifying certain components of them. So in this case, I have components, I have initialized with a string, okay, of a URL, and then see I have a password which is a part of the string which says SEECRET, but then I use components.password and I just rename it. So it's that simple. You don't have to use any of your string function, appending, appending with string, nothing. And finally you want to query the URL, you just have to use components.url, you get the URL. So that's it. So with this we come to an end of the session. So you can post your queries right now. And thank you so much for listening patiently for this webinar. And for any training related information, you can just log on to our website www.stylelearning.com, or call us at 9036979036, or write a mail to us atc@style.in. So this slide would be there for a couple of minutes. People who want to make a note of it, you can make a note of it. And there's one more thing which is installed for you guys. Now that is, we have an upcoming introductory workshop on Swift soon. That is tomorrow from 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. and the venue is Style Lab Art Nagar. And for more information, you can just call us or write to us. Now, this is exclusively free for the guys who are attending this webinar for today, and there are very limited seats, so please hurry, and we'll have a very good session tomorrow. So there are some. So I'm thankful to you guys. I mean, you guys are very interactive. You guys are posting some queries here. So there's a query that, as we know, iOS 8 beta is released. So will you give details in the recent demo? Yes, of course. There will be a webinar soon on Swift, which would be given, and as well as on iOS 8 beta. And another query says, you suggest to use @import in case of #import for project files available. Okay, now this is a very good query. Now what I want to tell you is what Apple has told us, it is just for the system frameworks. It is not for the user-related frameworks. Maybe they might come up with this feature for normal users to use. So right now it is just for the system framework. So there's another question like how first object method of an array will deal when the array is empty. It will probably return nil. That's the answer. It may return nil. So how to handle the keyboard in scroll view with multiple text fields? Okay, so what you can do is there are multiple ways to do this. You can actually get the position of your the text field, text fields, and you can update them, or you could actually use the built-in observers. So that's it, guys. Thank you so much. And thank you, TechGig, for this opportunity for giving me to deliver this webinar.
Yeah, thank you, Rajesh. But there are questions coming in, so if you would like to take the questions, you can do them now.
Okay.
Are you able to see the questions coming into you?
Yes. Yes, I'm able to. Okay, another question is, do background services drain device battery? Yes, because as I told you, in this case, it large file, let's say, in terms of background services, and it's at a point of time you're going to download, you're going to contact the server, you're going to download some data. Yes, it's gonna drain the device battery, but not as such like background fetch or the remote notifications. Okay, so there's a question, how would I refresh the UI with no delegates and data source available? So if you're talking about when you're in a background, I don't think, because you have to go via the delegates, the only way. Because the whole thing is done under a background daemon. So you have to use the delegates for them. So another question says that how to revert back to the previous version if I update my OS to 7.2.1. Okay, so now you can always, so if you have a version, let's say 7.1 you have, and now you have 7.2.1, so you can always revert it back. So how to do this is you need to just download the file from the Apple's site. You know, you would find it will be specific to the device. You know, iPhone will have a separate OS file, iPod will have a separate OS file, will have a separate OS file, and the method is called it is a fresh install. Actually, you need to just use your iTunes and do a fresh installs, and make sure you take a backup before you do this, because if you don't take your backup, it's going to be like completely, and the whole data is going to go. So take a backup in iTunes if you know iTunes. iTunes. You use your iTunes and take a backup, and then you can always restore your app to the other version, the previous version. So I think that, okay, there's another query here. So could it be possible to set or program the background service to download a large file while the phone is being charged so that the phone's battery isn't affected? Okay, so yes, when you're actually downloading a large file, you can just, you know, anyway downloading a large file is gonna drain your battery. That we know, depend upon how you are contacting the server, how much time does it actually taking to download the data. So in this case, the phone battery is not affected because you actually plugged your phone and it's trying to download the data. So there's no chance of battery getting affected because at the same point of time it's actually charging. So another question, should we inform the user that this app will download the data in background? I would say that you see, it matters. Let's say that you should make your app, you know, more user friendly. The user should not even know much of interaction with the app. It should happen, you know, kind of magically. That's how iOS deals with it. So let's say if you are releasing some kind of updates, at that point you can just specify, you know, yes, my app, it can do a background download, it can fully download your data even if you switch your app or things like that. But I don't have to, because the iOS 7 will do this. So you really don't have to specify that unless you're putting it in your updates. So I think I've answered a couple of queries. So
there are a lot of questions in the backlog, and there are lots of questions coming in still. But due to time constraint, I have to request you to take these questions offline, which I will share with you through email. So if you would like to sum up the session for today, you can do it now.
Okay. So I think, yeah, that's it. I would be answering all those queries later. So yeah, so please post in all the queries. I'll try to answer them as much as possible via my mail. So I think you have my mail ID, so you can just send all those queries to my mails. I'll try to answer them at the most I could.
And I'm really thankful to our guest speaker today for conducting this wonderful webinar. It was indeed a great session. I would also like to thank all our participants for their support in making this webinar a success. The recording of the webinar will be available on techgig.com by tomorrow. Thank you all for joining us today. Thank you, Rajesh, for taking the time out and
Thank
having
you.
us. I hope you have a great evening ahead.
Thank you so much. Same to you.
Okay. Thank you. Bye-bye.